welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I'm your host, Jessica, and I'm here with the author of a book that covers a lot of topics very sensitively and was written really interestingly, which I want to talk to you about when we get into it. But first of all, I just want to welcome you to the show, Amy Rossi. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you got the idea for CoverGirl?
Great, yes. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm Amy Rossi, author of The Cover Girl, and that is an idea that has been kicking around in my head, honestly, for a really long time. Probably since I was a teenager watching nostalgia rock and roll programming and discovered that rock stars becoming the legal guardians of their underage girlfriends was a thing that happened in the 1970s. And that was just something that kind of stuck with me. And I always knew I kind of wanted to write about it. And I started writing when I was in graduate school about 11 years ago, preparing for my fall semester, I started writing a short story about a teenage model who falls into the path of a rock star. And it eventually became a novel. And here we are today.
So it was just sort of just really immersive, just in the time periods that it took place. It takes place in different time periods, but the central character, her name is Birdie, which I'm curious, was that symbolic a little bit?
So when I first started writing about this, when it was a short story, her name was Libby, and that kind of didn't fit. And I was looking for nicknames for Elizabeth that were like not the most traditional. And I thought that it does work symbolically. I think that kind of conjures up this idea of like a very delicate person, but it also kind of alludes to her kind of waspy background as well, and how she grew up and how she might end up in this world.
I also kind of felt though like it was like, like she was like a bird, like, something to be looked at and sort of
Mm-hmm.
like kept in
Mm-hmm.
a cage in a way, which she sort of was. Like she's very, it really hurt because like her parents, like, her mother is like telling her she has no personality, which is really, really harsh to say to a teenage girl. And, you keep hearing, I mean, just for listeners, she's the beginning, you find out that she was discovered in a department store by this woman, Harriet, who manages models. And, you keep hearing like, oh, well, you have your looks, or, like she must be a dream to work with. She's so quiet. And like that kind of like made me wonder as well. Even though Birdie was like a nickname, I remember, people having back then, hearing like my parents' friends, or like knew somebody named Birdie. But I did kind of get the feeling like, like she was like kind of treated like a pet.
I think that's like one of those wonderful unintended consequences of writing, because as you're saying this, I'm like, yes, of course, this is what I meant. Of course, she was meant to be kept in a cage, like a little bird in a gilded cage, but that wasn't quite what I was thinking. But I do love that that's what kind of it conjured for you, because that shows that even if something's not in your mind, like in the really forefront, it can still be kind of there subconsciously, and things can work on multiple levels. So I'm really glad you noticed that.
But yeah, so she's discovered and she's brought into the world of modeling. And there's a lot you can say about that in general, but the other, like a big, there's a lot of layers to the story. There's her relationship with being a 13-year-old model, and also a 13-year-old girl who's actually quite shy, and just not really comfortable with herself particularly. And then there is the whole music scene where, the unnamed rock star kind of comes in and, grooms her. I mean, there's really no other way of saying it, finds this girl who's young and pretty, but doesn't really understand why she's of interest or that she's even that pretty to, these people who want to dress her up, and automatically seems to think score. And it pretty much sets like her entire life awry. It sets the tone for everything. And I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but as we know from shows like Behind the Music, the rock stars are the ones who get to go on stage and continue to put out music, and their teenage girlfriends are like footnotes in that.
Mhm.
And like depending on how you looked at it back then, like people would say, "Oh, it was a different time," or "Everybody did that," or someone might just say, "That's weird." Or someone might be like, "Ugh, like that's actually not cool and really speaks to this person's culture and the culture that made it okay." But that is true. You do hear quite a lot about it. And Birdie just kind of wanted to be like noticed, and like not just noticed, but also seen. And because obviously if you're a model, you're being noticed, but she felt like this guy saw her. And it was just kind of heartbreaking, in and of itself. So, like, how did her world sort of expand from Harriet discovering her to the rock star?
Right. So when Birdie's about 15, she starts not quite looking right for jobs. Her face is too young for her body, basically. And so it's kind of unnerving for casting directors. They're not really wanting to, she's too young looking for an adult role. She's too old looking for a teen role, and there's not really a place for her. And she prides herself on how hard she works because she's trying to give value to somebody, right? She just wants to be valued. And Harriet appreciates how hard she works. And so when the idea of this job for an album cover comes up, Harriet's not really interested in it, but there's also that kind of idea in the back of her mind, like her mother's telling her she's boring, she's not interesting. Like, what's more interesting than a rock album cover? That's so outside of her comfort zone. So she goes to this cattle call audition basically and is pulled right out of line. And that does it expands and contracts her world at the same time because he sees her, he brings her into his entourage. He, I think this is not a spoiler, he brings her on tour with him. So she's seeing the whole country, she's going all these places, but it's all in this really small bubble because, you know, yes, paperwork has been signed. He is her legal guardian at this point, but he's still a 31-year-old man traveling the country with a 15-year-old girl, and people are going to talk. So it keeps their world very small, and she can kind of see the difference between like what her life in the public eye has been up until this point, which is nowhere near the echelons of fame he has reached. And it also kind of, she's not really aware of it at the time, but the reader can kind of see all these things that have to be in place to make something like this possible. All these people who have to look away and kind of let somebody run with their, I guess, predilection is the best way to put it. I don't know. Somebody like, he has a manager who's kind of turning away. He's got bandmates who are like, well, this is ridiculous, but nobody's really saying anything. There are other wives and girlfriends that they come across who are like, oh, well, she's very young, but nobody really does anything. And I think because that kind of shrinks her world, it expands in one way because she's out of her house. She's taking these jobs. Harriet's trying to get her on the road to like get her away from him. But at the same time, she's just in this little bubble where everything is normal.
I really liked the way that you wrote dialogue versus Birdie. You didn't do like you hear what she's thinking and she tells you what she says, but you don't really work with her specifically with quotes. You hear her internal dialogue a lot, and you hear like she tells you what she says to people and what her responses are, but the only people who get quotes are the people all around her. That was really, really interesting.
Thank you. I'm so excited to talk about this. I haven't really gotten a chance to talk about it much yet. Um, yeah, like the thing about Birdie is she's not a reliable narrator, and she's an unreliable narrator, not in necessarily the thriller sense, but she's incapable of understanding what's happened to her. And um, so there's that question of, is she really saying this to somebody? Or is that just what she's saying in her head? And you'll never quite know. And it's also a way of showing how she doesn't trust her own interpretation of events. She believes what people have said to her. She can take that at face value, but she doesn't trust her own voice. So she's not going to give it to you because it's been taken from her in a way. And that was a kind of a challenge to write, to be honest with you, because I had to make sure that it flowed within the pace of a conversation. And I think there are a lot of people who didn't notice, like early readers, like, oh, well, I didn't notice that, which is like kind of what I was hoping for. But I'm also very excited to talk about it because it was a conscious choice on my part, and it defines who she is as a character. She's somebody who feels so detached from her own experiences that she can't tell you what she said.
Yeah, it was a really interesting just read in that sense. I also wanted to talk a little bit, how much research did you do into like fashion and modeling lingo? Like, going on, what was it, a look and see?
A go see, yeah. So I was really obsessed with models as a child. I convinced my mother to let me go to weekend modeling courses at the local John Robert Powers when I was in fifth grade. So I was kind of baked into my own vocabulary. And there were these books called the Ford Supermodels of the World books that the Ford Modeling Agency put out when I was maybe in middle school. So I had like gleaned a lot of the information from there that I had kind of kept all this time. But I did read a lot of memoirs, Brooke Shields, Beverly Johnson, Michael Gross wrote a really comprehensive history of modeling. So that was a lot of that. There was a great documentary on HBO about supermodels then and now called About Face that dealt with like aging in the modeling industry. I, of course, watched a lot of America's Next Top Model because a lot of stuff just hasn't changed since then. There was a great documentary about the Battle of Versailles, which is basically my Roman Empire. So it found its way into the novel a few times. So that was a great 1973 fashion show, which really put American designers out on the international stage for the first time and kind of had that ready to wear look against French couture looks, and the Americans won in air quotes. But that was it was a lot of fun to do that research. So yeah, trying to get that lingo right was a task, but there was a lot of great memoirs I turned to.
One thing that also was really just sort of great and poignant, though, is, like through all the heartbreak, Birdie finds almost like a purpose in helping other people whose, I guess, their voices had been taken from them for other reasons during the AIDS crisis. And you could really tell what a caring individual she was. When she found herself, and it's very difficult to talk about this time period at all and the entertainment industry at all during this time period. You can't gloss over what a big deal it was because it was really what everybody was talking about. Literally you could not get away from talking about AIDS in one way or the other. Um, so when it came to writing that part, um, like what was your process? How did you find her there, other than the fact that it's kind of different, you cannot pretend it didn't happen. And how did you get to sort of writing her world as she started getting involved with helping these people out, not being somebody who had AIDS herself, but really just like seeing them not as like some like persona non grata that you don't go near, but like a family and helping people who needed it.
Yeah. It was important to me for this book to be more than just her life as a model and more than just her time with a rock star. I want it to be a full picture of a woman's life. And because she was in fashion, it did naturally bring her there since I was covering a large time period. It was also something that was personal to me. My uncle passed away from AIDS-related causes about 25 years ago. So it was a different time period in terms of like treatments available and just understanding of the disease than when she was working in. But it it was something that I really wanted to talk about because it was formative for me. And I did a lot of really interesting research into that. I watched some documentaries about ACT UP in New York, and I went deep into some archives about the organization in Boston, or organizations in Boston which she ends up volunteering at, and like reading handbooks about how people provided home health care. And it's something that's been interesting, or something that's been an interest of mine for a while, just because it was so personal, and the way my family was able to approach it in the late 90s with a much broader understanding, and like making sure my uncle was a member of the family and was able to be at home and be taken care of. I wanted to like honor that time period and people who might had not been so lucky. And I also think it was really important for Birdie to step outside of herself. She's not a perfect person. I think what she has gone through kind of makes her a bit self-absorbed, and she's wrapped up in what happened to her, and how she views what happened to her. And so this was a way for her to kind of experience the world outside of the rock star, experience the world outside of modeling, and see what else is out there, and become she kind of has natural compassion, but really, develop that muscle and become a more engaged person, become more involved in the world, and broaden her worldview in that way. And it was important for me to have her grow in a way that was unrelated to like everything else we had seen.
So, but before we go, are you working on something after this, now that you've gotten this story out?
Yes. I was fortunate to sign a 2-book deal. So I'm working on another book now. And honestly, I think there are things we return to, right? We have our obsessions, we have our pet causes, and I think pop culture and commercialized nostalgia is definitely something I'm super interested in. As somebody who came of age at the millennium with all of the VH1 programming about, I love the 70s and I love the 80s, and I'm really interested in what survives and who gets to tell that story and who gets to define what the 70s was and what the 80s was and what the 90s were and all of that. So I'm working on something that does deal with nostalgia and pop culture and what it means to be a woman in entertainment and what it means to be a woman on the sideline of somebody else's story. So some very similar themes and concepts, but in a much different way and a lighter way this time. I think I need a little bit of a lighter story, but I get to explore some of my favorite topics still. And we'll still be in LA. We'll still have some Sunset Strip. We'll have a little bit more hair metal this time.
Exciting. Well, I hope I get to talk to you about that.
Absolutely. I would love that.
And thank you again for being with us. Check out The Cover Girl. It's really, really good. It's like I said, it's very interestingly written. And look up how many rock stars did this, because it's really just wild.
Yes, there are plenty of Google searches that await you.
All right. Well, once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was
Amy Rossi.
And we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.